In our previous videos, we have started learning about Jest and how it can help us writing text in an easy way. So here you can see we need to understand about a lot of different concepts to write text for different circumstances. And one of the concepts that we should learn about is mocking a function when you're writing text. So you must be thinking what is mocking a function means. So mocking a function means you're trying to fake a function, and based on that function that you created, you try to test the implementation of something like forEach that you have written here. So this forEach is an implementation of array.forEach, and all it is doing is looping over the items, and on each item it is calling the function callback. So it accepts two parameters, items and callback. So here, rather than calling this function 10 times with different callbacks, you can fake a callback, and based on that you can test the function. So here it is creating a fake callback using a special function Jest.fn, and this is the arrow function that will be passed inside it. Now forEach accepts an array and it also accepts a callback function. So instead of an actual callback function, you pass a fake or a mock callback function. Now what you can do, you can test on the basis of it. You can say, okay, mock callback dot mock.calls.length. So the number of time this is going to be called is 2 because the length of array is 2. Similarly, you can also spy on what are the parameters being passed whenever the function is called. So you can use .mock.calls. Here you can see that you are using two sets of square bracket. The first one represents the first call and the second square bracket represents the index of argument. So which argument you want to test. So this means whenever you were calling the function for the first time, the first argument was expected to be 0. Can you see that? Because forEach gives access to 3 arguments: value, index and array. Don't worry if you're not able to understand it here. We are going to write our own example and we will go ahead to understand how mock function works. So here you can see we have written two functions, forEach and map, and we are exporting that as an object. So we can write test for it inside forEach.test.js. So let's go ahead and look at the test for these two functions. So here we are importing two functions, forEach and map, and we have written a sample test for both of these functions. The first test says, I expect whenever you call forEach with an array and a callback to return undefined. Why? Because forEach always returns undefined because there is no return statement being used inside this function. And that is how forEach works, right? It doesn't return anything. It means it is going to return undefined. So what other test can we write for this kind of a situation? Because whenever a function returns a value based on parameters, it is a lot more easier to test. But here we know that no matter what we are doing with forEach, it is always going to return undefined. So we will not be able to test the actual implementation of the callback. And that is where mock function comes in play. So what we are going to do, we are going to create a mock function. So we'll say const Mock.fn forEach, and here to create mock function we use the function Jest.fn, and you can pass a parameter that can be a callback function. For now we are not doing anything. So here we have created the mock function. Now what we can do, we can call forEach. So we'll say let's call forEach with an array, and that will contain things like 1, 2 and 3. This is the array, and the second parameter needs to be a callback function. So here we can say mock forEach. So we are calling forEach with an array and a mock function. Now let's go ahead and write test based on this mock function. So just try to understand how many times do you think this callback function for forEach that we are mocking is going to be called. So for each element of the array, it is going to be called once. That is what we need to test. So here to test the number of times this function will be called, we are going to use mock forEach dot mock dot calls. So using mock forEach dot mock dot calls dot length, it will return a value of number of times this function being called on this array. So we expect this to be 3, right? So that is what we want. So in this way, what you can do is, based on this mock function, you can test how many times this function getting called. So what are you actually doing? You are creating a fake function, and based on that fake function, you are trying to spy on them. How many times the function got called, or with what all argument it is getting called. Let's save it and see what happens to the result. So here we can see the test for each function is passing, test map function is also passing. So we'll go ahead write some more tests based on the examples here. So here you can see that you can mock a function, how many times it is getting called. The second thing is, what are the parameter it is being called on. So you can just get this example from here and we'll put it here. We want expect the mock for each function, and the first time it is being called and the first argument it is taking, I want that to be equal to 1. What if you just instead of 1 you say that the first argument should be 2? You will see that your test fails by saying expected 2 but received 1, because the first time when you're calling the function, the first argument is 1. Here you will have to change that and say the second time when I'm calling the function, the first argument should be 2. Similarly, you can test on the third call, because we know this function is going to be called 3 times. So here we can just write 3. So in that way, what is happening is we can mock or spy on the function that we are passing here. How many times it is getting called, what is the first parameter, the last parameter, and a lot of other stuff. Now, another thing we can also do is we can test the return value of first call. So for that, we can just copy this from here and say that whenever you're calling mock function, the result for the first call is going to be undefined, right? That is what it is going to be. And that way you'll see it pass the result. What if you just instead of undefined you say 1, it will fail the test. So here you know that whenever you're calling mock for each, the result for the first call and the value of it is going to be undefined. And here you can see that the test is being passed, right? But what if instead of undefined you just say 1? Will it work? It will not. It will say that expected is 1 but received undefined. So in that way, using mock function, you can test different circumstances that this function will be in and write test for those things. So if you want to take a look at what are the different functions available whenever you're doing the mock test, you can look at the API reference here and click on mock functions. So here you can see mock function.get mock name, mock.calls, mock.results, and here you can see all the API that is available on mock function. You can use all of these things. So let's go ahead and use the mock function to write test for map function. So here we are going to write another mock function. So we'll say const mock.fn map, and to write the test we can just say Jest.fn, and here you can also pass a callback function. So let us pass a callback function. It is accepting a value, and based on that it is just returning value multiplied by 2. So this is your mock function. You want to use that. So to use it, we'll say map, and here we'll pass an array. So let's pass array of value 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. And on the place of callback function, we are going to say mock.fn map. Now let's go ahead write tests for it. So we know that the first test that we can write is how many times this function is getting called. So we'll say mock.fn map. We know that it's going to be called 5 times for the value 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So we'll say mock.calls.length. I want this to be 5. So that is our first test. Similarly, we can also test on different arguments. So we can say mock.calls. Whenever you're calling it, you're going to get access to an array of arrays. So whenever you're calling it for the first time, the first parameter needs to be 5, right? Similarly, you can also say whenever you're calling for the first time, I want the second parameter to be the index of the array. What is the index of the array? That is 0. So if you look at the implementation of map, you can see that we are calling callback function, and the first parameter is the element, second is index, and third is the array. So here we are testing the second parameter. Similarly, we can also test for the result of the first callback when called with the value of 5. So we can say Mock.fn map. When you mock it, the result of first call, I want that to be equal to 10, because when this 5 getting passed inside this callback, it will return 10. Similarly, you can also say the last one, that is going to be the index 4. When called with that, it needs to return 18. And let's make one test fail. So I'm going to say when fifth time it is going to be called, it is also going to return 18. That is not the case, right? So when you look at it, you will see that one test failed. And which one is it? It is the last one that we wanted it to fail. As soon as we remove that, and you will see that another test is also failing. Why? Because we haven't removed this line. Let's save this and we can see that. So both these functions, forEach and map, is being tested properly. So in that way, we got to understand about using mock functions. So mock functions are like fake functions that we can create using Jest, and that can help us spy on those functions. Why do we need to spy on those functions? Because there is a lot of times that your function doesn't return different value based on inputs. Or maybe you want to test what is happening when the first time this function is called. Or in simpler terms, you can say you want to spy on those functions. The way you do that is by creating a mock function by using Jest.fn. Jest.fn also accepts a callback function. In that way, it will act in the same way that this callback function is acting. So in that way, so when you pass a callback function to it, the mock function will behave in the same way. It's just that, so whenever you're passing a callback function inside Jest.fn, what are you actually doing is you want to spy on this function, and Jest.fn gives you the ability to spy on this function. So here, by using that, we are able to test the implementation of map.